Uganda has encountered several humanitarian crises, from refugee influxes to natural disasters. While international organizations have played a crucial role in providing aid to those affected by these crises, there's been a growing recognition that the current system of humanitarian aid is not sustainable or effective in the long term. In 2016, the World Humanitarian Summit challenged the humanitarian sector to recognize the increased and prominent role of national and local actors in the humanitarian response. This resulted in the Grand Bargain, which committed to contributing towards improving the effectiveness and efficiency of humanitarian action. The localization of humanitarian aid through the Charter for Change is a critical step towards building sustainable and effective responses that prioritizes local actors and promotes local leadership.
For me, I see the localization conversation now going to the space that will discuss root causes of issues, that will empower rights holders to make informed choices, because the crisis we're dealing with, not just within the region, but globally, oftentimes if it's not a governance issue, it's a climate change issue, but climate change also starts with you and me. And if that is not effected at the local level, we are going to increasingly see the impact of disasters arising from climate change or from conflict, which will be very costly. What we put through in development is wiped out in a conflict, in a disaster, and rebuilding is even much more costly. So for me, localization agenda is, if I'm to use the English adage, a stitch in time saves nine. And much as it will appear to be expensive to get started initially, if we don't have that investment, the costs are going to be much, much more. And so I think it's really the right thing to do, and I'm happy that the conversation is now happening at national level. As a humanitarian platform, we've had specific asks to donors, to the government, to UN agencies, to INGOs, and we have commitments to ourselves as local actors. Because it's one thing to say that we are competent local actors, but it's another thing to have systems in place to ensure that the small organization just works as an effective organization as the big organization.
Over 100 international organizations in Uganda have signed on to the Charter for Change. By committing to the Charter, these organizations help to ensure that humanitarian aid is appropriate, relevant, and is empowering local communities and actors.
The Charter for Change commitments are about 8 and are mainly looking into quality of funding, its effectiveness. We are looking at the quality of partnerships towards changing the global humanitarian response. And as you know, in the 5 years, the Charter for Change has been able to make so many steps in terms of saying that, because now we see more of international organizations working with local organizations, we see more donors, we see policy changes happening, we see more quality partnerships happening. Very many donors are now encouraging issues of, in terms of funding, they're encouraging things to do with partnerships, consortiums between international organizations and local organizations, and which is a plus, because those things used not happen before. It used to be that the international organizations, once a crisis happens, are the ones who rush into an area to have an emergency, even when the local organizations are already in place.
We work in different refugee camps across the region, and one of the camps we work in is Changwali. And that's where CARE International spotted me under the She Lead in Crisis. And in that space, we've worked with CARE International to see that persons living with disability are not left behind in the Changwali refugee camps. But then also doing that She Lead encounter with my mentor from CARE International. I managed basically to get into bigger platform. For example, right now I'm a member of Charter for Change, a charter that basically working with organizations that are working in humanitarian spaces, and they are trying to support this organization to get direct funding to support in their implementation, which I believe, as Tunaweza Foundation, is an opportunity for us to leverage on going forward that can support us to get more funding for the activities we are doing in different refugee camps, which is a bigger opportunity for us.
In Save the Children, we believe that by shifting greater resources, greater capacities to local and national actors, the result will be more timely, more appropriate, more effective outcomes for children, and also better realization of their rights. We are there to complement the efforts of national actors. We are there to help them to become more visible, to become more present in decision-making processes and in coordination for us. Again, our role as Save the Children is to support our partners to become ready and to be able to receive the funding directly from complex donors. But at the same time, it is very important that these partners do get the same kind of support, for example, to cover their overhead costs and to invest into their own capacity development and organizational development. And that's one area where we need to collaborate with donors to make sure that that actually happens. We have also this year recruited a partnership specialist who will lead the process of development of our own localization strategy here in Uganda. And in that process, he is going to collaborate and consult local NGO partners. In our Education Cannot Wait programming, where Save the Children is one of co-grantees, in this new phase, we have ensured that among our 13 partners, 6 of them are local NGOs, and 2 of them are actually refugee-led NGOs. These are efforts that we are doing now, but are we happy with where we are with localization? No, definitely not. We know that our localization is still limited. It is still transactional, it is inconsistent, but we are committed to work towards a vision where local and national actors will be driving sustainable realization of children's rights in Uganda.
While the Charter for Change has raised awareness on the need to localize humanitarian aid, there is need to work towards a more equitable distribution of resources and greater participation of local organizations in decision-making processes.
We are taking advantage of synergies between international NGOs and national NGOs based on our own experience. We take advantage of knowledge of our local context, our cultural underpinnings, and the political terrain, while we also recognize that international organizations are well endowed with resources that include technical and otherwise. This agenda has also enabled us to realize the advantage of cross-learning between international organizations and national organizations, TPO being one. International organizations have access to, they have systems, they have learnt many more lessons than TPO, and we are able to tap into those lessons learned, and they also tap into the lessons they can learn from a local organization like TPO. So, however, there have been challenges that have come that we've experienced. The one is that we find ourselves competing for the same resources with international organizations. I've not seen a funding call that comes and specifically delineates funding for national organizations.
In essence, what we are calling for as national organizations is deployment of local resources, deployment of local finances, deployment of local leadership, and deployment in terms of local design and local implementation of projects. If this perhaps is actually adhered to the letter, then we can say yes, we are on the road to localization. One of the things that we've been asking for is that we need more autonomy. We've been also having conversations with INGOs that we, in terms of funding, we need more resources, and especially we need more resources that can enable us to cover our institutional overhead costs. But we're also alive to the fact that no donor, no, whether bilateral, multilateral agency or INGO, is going to be able to give us more access to local resources, but also giving us more money that we can actually use to cover institutional overhead costs unless our house is in order. And that's why we at the Uganda National NGO Forum are at the forefront of the regulatory mechanism, which we call the Quality Assurance Certification Mechanism. Many would know it by the acronym of QAM. We think QAM is not a policing instrument. QAM is a tool that can actually be used for both, being able to find out what are the capacity deficits, and then we are able to plug those capacity deficits.